Mira walked into the xenobiology lecture hall at exactly 8 in the morning, just like she did every day. She carried her worn backpack over one shoulder and a simple paper notebook in her hand. The notebook was old-fashioned by galactic standards. Most students used holographic tablets or neural interfaces to record their lessons. But Mira preferred paper and pen. She made her way to the back row, her footsteps quiet on the metal floor. The lecture hall was massive, built to accommodate students of all sizes and shapes. There were seats for the towering Vexlar who stood nearly 3 meters tall. There were liquid tanks for the aquatic Mercii. There were gravity platforms for species that preferred to float. And in the back corner, there was a simple human-sized desk and chair. Mira sat down and opened her notebook. Around her, the hall filled with the sounds of 200 alien students. The Krolvians chittered in their clicking language. The Sesic hummed their melodic conversations. The Tarvians communicated through scent clouds that made translation devices work overtime. It was noisy and chaotic and overwhelming. Mira had been at the Galactic Academy for 3 months now. She was one of only 15 humans in the entire station. Humanity was the newest species to join the galactic community, and most aliens still saw them as primitive, weak, undeveloped, not quite ready for the advanced knowledge taught at the academy. Some students were curious about humans. Some were friendly. And some, like the 3 Krolvians who were walking toward her desk right now, saw humans as easy targets. Zexthor arrived first. He was big for a Krolvian, with 4 powerful arms and a shell-like exoskeleton that gleamed under the lecture hall lights. His mandibles clicked together and what Mira had learned was amusement. Behind him came Vral and Kess, smaller but no less intimidating. "Look who's here early," Zexthor said loudly. His voice carried across the lecture hall. Students who were already seated turned to look. The little human trying so hard to keep up with real students. Mira didn't look up. She pulled out her pen and wrote the date at the top of a fresh page. Her hand was steady. "I think she's ignoring us," Vral said, leaning over her desk. "How rude. We're just being friendly." Kess laughed, a sound like metal scraping against stone. "Maybe she doesn't understand us. I heard human brains are very small. They probably can't process complex language." Several students nearby chuckled. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Nobody ever said anything. Mira turned slightly in her seat and reached into her backpack. She pulled out her textbook and placed it on the desk. Then she returned to her notebook. "What's she writing?" Zexthor moved closer, looming over her. "Let me see." He reached for her notebook with one of his clawed hands. Mira calmly placed her palm over the page, covering her writing. She still didn't speak. She simply looked up at him with dark, steady eyes. For a moment, Zexthor seemed taken aback. There was something in her gaze that didn't match her silence. Something cold and calculating that made him pause. Then he laughed and pulled his hand back. "See? She won't even defend her own property. Pathetic." The 3 Krolvians walked away, still laughing. They took their seats in the middle section of the lecture hall, where the popular students sat. Where students with power and influence gathered. Mira watched them go. Then she looked back down at her notebook and continued writing. At the front of the lecture hall, Professor Rain began setting up his holographic displays. He was a Sesic, one of the oldest and wisest species in the galaxy. His 6 eyes could see in multiple spectrums of light at once. Right now, 2 of those eyes were focused on the back of the room, watching Mira with interest. He had seen this pattern before. Week after week, the same 3 students harassed the same quiet human. And week after week she never reacted. Never complained. Never fought back. She just sat there and wrote in that notebook. Rain was curious what she was writing. He had 300 years of teaching experience and he recognized patience when he saw it. But he also recognized something else in Mira's eyes. Something that made him wonder if her silence was really weakness, or something far more dangerous. The lecture began. Rain spoke about the evolutionary adaptations of silicon-based life forms. Students took notes. Some asked questions. Mira wrote steadily in her notebook, her eyes moving between the professor and her page. Halfway through the lecture, Zexthor raised his voice again. "Professor, I have a question. Do humans even have proper evolutionary adaptations? Or are they just lucky their planet didn't kill them?" Laughter rippled through the lecture hall. Rain's mandibles tightened. "All species that survive to develop space travel have successful evolutionary adaptations, Zexthor. Humans are no exception." "But what are they?" Vral chimed in. "They're not strong. They're not fast. They don't have shells or venom or claws. What do they have?" Rain considered the question carefully. He looked at Mira, who had stopped writing and was now watching the conversation with those patient, calculating eyes. Humans have something very few other species possess, Rain said slowly. They have the ability to wait, to plan, to endure suffering for long periods while they prepare for the perfect moment to act. On Earth, humans were not the strongest predators. They were prey for many larger animals. So they learned to be patient, to track their enemies for days, to strike only when victory was certain. The lecture hall grew quiet. Students shifted uncomfortably. They also have exceptional memory, Rain continued. Humans remember everything. Every slight, every wrong, every detail. And they use that information with remarkable precision. Zexthor's mandibles clicked nervously. That sounds like a threat, Professor. It's not a threat, Rain replied. It's simply biology. Every species has its strengths. Mira smiled slightly and returned to her notebook. Her pen moved across the page in quick, efficient strokes. When the lecture ended, students filed out of the hall in clusters, chattering about their next classes or upcoming exams. Mira packed her things slowly, waiting for the crowd to thin. She preferred to walk the corridors when they were less crowded. As she stood to leave, she glanced at her notebook one final time. The page was filled with neat, organized notes. But they weren't notes about silicon-based life forms. At the top of the page she had written a date and time. Below that she had documented everything Zexthor, Vral, and Kess had said. Their exact words. Their positions in the room. Who had witnessed the incident. She had even sketched a quick diagram showing where each student had been sitting. At the bottom of the page she had written a number. 47. This was the 47th incident she had documented. 47 times the Krolvians had harassed her. 47 pieces of evidence, each one carefully recorded with dates, times, witnesses, and details. Mira closed her notebook and slipped it into her backpack. Then she walked out of the lecture hall, her footsteps quiet and purposeful. Professor Rain watched her go. He had been teaching long enough to recognize a predator when he saw one. And right now, watching Mira walk calmly through the doors, he realized something that made his scales prickle with concern. The Krolvians thought they were the hunters. But they had made a terrible mistake. They had spent 3 months teaching a human exactly where it hurt most. And humans, as he had just explained to the class, never forgot anything. He wondered if the Krolvians understood what they had done. Probably not. They saw silence as weakness. They saw patience as cowardice. They would learn the truth soon enough. Humans didn't strike when they were angry. They struck when they were ready. And Mira looked very, very ready. The weeks crawled by like a slow poison spreading through Mira's academic life. 14 weeks of calculated torment. 14 weeks of watching her hard work crumble under the weight of sabotage she could predict but never quite prevent. Week 5 brought the first major incident. Mira had spent 3 days preparing her molecular biology assignment, a detailed analysis of protein structures in extreme environments. She submitted it to the Academy database at 11:58, 2 minutes before the midnight deadline. At 11:59 the file corrupted. When she tried to resubmit, the system marked her as late. Failed assignment. The next morning, Zexthor submitted an identical paper. Word for word. Diagram for diagram. When Mira reported it to Professor Rain, the investigation found nothing. No proof of file tampering. No digital fingerprints. The Krolvians were too smart to leave obvious traces. Week 7 was worse. Mira arrived at her assigned laboratory station to find her entire semester project destroyed. She had been cultivating a rare bacterial culture from the Andromeda sector, watching it grow and mutate over weeks of careful observation. The containment field had been shut off. The culture was dead, contaminated, worthless. Equipment malfunction, the station technician said with a shrug. These things happen. Across the lab, Kess was cleaning his workstation with exaggerated care, humming a Krolvian tune. He didn't look at Mira. He didn't need to. They both knew the truth. Mira filed another report. Another investigation. Another dead end. Through it all, she kept writing in her notebook. Every incident. Every witness. Every suspicious technical failure. The notebook grew fat with evidence that nobody seemed to care about. The rumors started in week 9. Whispers in the corridors. Messages on the student network. Mira was cheating. Mira was buying answers from upperclassmen. Mira didn't deserve to be at the academy. She heard students talking as she walked past them in the cafeteria. I heard she bribed someone to get accepted, a Mercy Eye student said, their voice bubbling through their translation device. Humans aren't smart enough for real academic work. She probably doesn't even understand the lectures, another added. She just copies from other students. Mira bought her food and ate alone in her quarters. Again. Her roommate had left weeks ago. The social pressure of living with the outcast human had been too much. Week 11 brought physical barriers. Mira would arrive at the library to find her student access revoked. System error, the automated message said. By the time it was fixed, her study time was gone. She would try to access the simulation labs and find them booked solid, even though the schedule showed open slots just minutes before. Every roadblock was small enough to seem like coincidence. Every problem was technically explainable. But together they formed a pattern of systematic destruction. The Krolvians grew bolder with each success. They no longer bothered to hide their contempt. Zexthor would knock into Mira in the corridors, sending her books scattering across the floor. Sorry, he would say with false concern. Didn't see you there. You're so small. Vral would save seats in lecture halls, promising to hold one for Mira, then giving it away at the last moment. Oh, I forgot you were coming. My mistake. Kes spread stories about her family. I heard humans come from a planet so primitive they still have wars. Can you imagine? Actually killing each other over resources. How barbaric. Other students watched. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked sympathetic. But nobody intervened. Nobody wanted to be next. Mira watched them all. She wrote everything down. And she waited. Week 14 arrived with the weight of an ending. Final projects were due. The semester's culmination. Mira had spent months on her xenobiology presentation, a comprehensive study of cross-species communication methods. Was good work. Maybe her best work. She had backup files stored in 3 different locations. The presentation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Mira arrived early to set up her holographic displays. She uploaded her files to the presentation system and ran a test. Everything worked perfectly. She went to get a drink of water. She was gone for 3 minutes. When she returned, her files were gone. Not just deleted. Completely wiped from the system. Her backup drives had been physically destroyed, crushed into pieces of broken metal and plastic scattered across her presentation station. Professor Deshrain stood at the front of the room, his 6 eyes reflecting disappointment. Miss Chin, you have 5 minutes until your presentation slot. Where are your materials? Mira looked at the destroyed drives. She looked at Zexthor sitting in the 3rd row, his mandibles curved in satisfaction. She looked at the other students watching her with pity or indifference or cruel amusement. They were destroyed, she said quietly. Do you have any backup? I did. They're gone too. Rain's scales shifted colors, a sign of stress in Cesic physiology. Miss Chin, you understand what this means. Without a final project, you cannot pass this course. You will fail the semester. I understand. Is there anything you want to tell me? Any explanation? Mira looked at Zexthor one more time. He was leaning back in his seat, completely relaxed. He thought he had won. They all thought they had won. No explanation, Professor, Mira said. May I be excused? Shrain waved her away with one of his upper appendages. He looked genuinely sad. I'm sorry, Miss Chin. I wish things had been different. Mira gathered the pieces of her destroyed drives and placed them carefully in her backpack. Then she walked out of the lecture hall with her head high and her steps steady. That night she didn't sleep. She sat at her desk in her empty quarters, surrounded by holographic displays that cast blue light across her face. Her fingers flew across virtual keyboards, organizing files, compiling data, cross-referencing timestamps. She opened her notebook and flipped through 14 weeks of documentation. 47 incidents of harassment. 23 acts of sabotage. 16 cases of academic fraud. 12 violations of academy regulations. 8 instances of destruction of student property. She had names. She had dates. She had witnesses. She had recordings. She had forensic data. She had built a case so thorough that even the most skeptical investigator would have to acknowledge the truth. At 3 in the morning she finally closed her displays. She pulled out a formal briefcase, the kind human lawyers carried. She carefully organized her evidence into physical files and digital storage drives. Everything in perfect order. Everything labeled and indexed. At 8 the next morning, Mira walked through the corridors of the academy with her briefcase in hand. Students stared at her as she passed. Word had spread about her failure. The weak human had finally broken. She was probably leaving. Going home in disgrace. But Mira wasn't walking toward the docking bay. She was walking toward the administrative sector, where the academy's power resided. She stopped in front of a heavy door marked Disciplinary Council. She straightened her jacket, checked her appearance in the polished metal wall, and touched the entry request panel. A voice crackled through the speaker. State your business. My name is Mira Chin, student identification number HC2247. I am here to file a formal complaint and request an immediate hearing before the full disciplinary council. There was a pause. Ms. Chin, formal hearings require substantial evidence of serious violations. Frivolous requests waste council time. Mira looked down at her briefcase. Inside were hundreds of pages of documentation. Hours of audio and video recordings. Forensic analysis reports. Testimony from witnesses she had quietly interviewed over weeks. I have evidence, she said calmly. Substantial evidence. Of multiple serious violations. By multiple students. Over 14 weeks. Another pause, longer this time. Please wait. Mira waited. She set her briefcase down and leaned against the wall. Students hurried past her, rushing to their morning classes. Nobody looked at her. The failed human wasn't worth their attention anymore. The door opened. A tall Vexlar administrator stood in the doorway, looking down at her with compound eyes that could see in 17 different spectrums. The council will see you now, he said. They have cleared their morning schedule. This must be quite serious. Mira picked up her briefcase and smiled. It was a small smile, cold and patient. Yes, she said. It is very serious. She walked through the door into a chamber where the Academy's most powerful officials waited. And for the first time in 14 weeks, Mira Chen was ready to speak. The disciplinary council chamber was circular and cold. 7 council members sat in elevated seats arranged in a semicircle, representing the 7 founding species of the Galactic Academy. In the center of the room stood a single presentation platform with holographic projectors embedded in the floor. Mira walked to the platform with her briefcase. Her footsteps echoed in the silent chamber. She could feel all 14 eyes watching her. Some curious, some skeptical, some already dismissive. The head counselor was an ancient Vexlar named Quister. His compound eyes reflected rainbow patterns as he studied the small human standing before them. Miss Chin, his voice rumbled like distant thunder. You have requested an emergency hearing. The council's time is valuable. Please state your complaint. Mira set her briefcase on the platform and opened it. Honorable council members, I am here to present evidence of systematic harassment, academic sabotage, fraud, and destruction of student property. These violations have occurred over 14 weeks and involve multiple students acting in coordination. A Krolvian council member clicked her mandibles dismissively. We have investigated your previous complaints, Ms. Chin. No evidence was found. Are you wasting our time with more accusations you cannot prove? Mira looked directly at the Krolvian counselor. I can prove everything. I have been documenting every incident since the first week of the semester. I did not submit this evidence earlier because I wanted to build a complete picture of the pattern. Partial evidence would have been dismissed as coincidence or misunderstanding. Complete evidence cannot be ignored. She pulled out her first file and uploaded it to the chamber's holographic system. The air above the platform shimmered and came alive with images. Incident 1. Week 1 Day 4. Timestamp 8:15 in the morning. The hologram showed the Xenobiology lecture hall. It showed Zex, Thor, Vral, and Kess approaching Mira's desk. The audio was crystal clear. Every mocking word. Every cruel laugh. The timestamp verified the date and time. Incident 2. Week 1 Day 5. Another recording. Another public humiliation. Mira's voice narrated each incident with clinical precision, no emotion, just facts and evidence. She went through the first 10 incidents quickly. The council members leaned forward in their seats. This was not what they had expected. This was not a student complaining about hurt feelings. This was a documented legal case. Week 5 brought the first act of sabotage. Mira pulled up technical logs from the Academy database. My molecular biology assignment was submitted at 11:58. These server logs show my file was accessed from an external terminal at 11:59. The access code belongs to Laboratory Station 47, which is assigned to Zex Thor. The Krolvian counselor's mandibles went still. That proves nothing. Perhaps you accessed his terminal. Mira smiled slightly. The Academy has security cameras in every laboratory. Would you like to see who was at Station 47 at that exact time? She didn't wait for an answer. The hologram shifted to show security footage. Zex Thor sat at his terminal, his claws moving across the interface. The timestamp matched perfectly. But that is still not proof he accessed my file, the Krolvian counselor protested, though her voice was less certain now. You are correct. Which is why I also have this. Mira displayed a data recovery file. I used forensic software to recover deleted access logs from that terminal. They show my assignment file was opened, copied, and then corrupted. All from Station 47. All at 11:59. The chamber went quiet. Council members exchanged glances. Mira continued. Incident after incident. Each one documented with multiple forms of evidence. Audio recordings of threats. Video footage of property destruction. Digital forensics showing file tampering. Witness statements from students she had quietly interviewed, students who had seen things but been too afraid to speak up. She had been thorough. Frighteningly thorough. Every piece of evidence was time-stamped, verified, and cross-referenced. There were no gaps. No assumptions. No maybes. Just cold, hard proof. 47 incidents in total. She displayed them all. Counselor Quister's compound eyes had shifted from rainbow colors to a dull gray. This is extensive. Miss Chin, why did you not bring this evidence to us sooner? Because partial evidence would have led to partial justice, Mira replied. The perpetrators would have received warnings or minor punishments. They would have learned to be more careful. The harassment would have continued, just in ways harder to prove. I needed to document the complete pattern. I needed evidence so overwhelming that the only possible response would be permanent removal. A Cessic counselor spoke up, her voice gentle. You planned this from the beginning. Yes. After my first complaint was dismissed, I realized the system required absolute proof. So I decided to give you absolute proof. These are serious accusations, Counselor Quarter said. The accused students have the right to defend themselves. Bring in Zexthor, Vral, and Kess. The chamber doors opened. The 3 Krolvians entered, their shells gleaming with confidence. They had been summoned but clearly thought this was another formality. Another complaint that would be dismissed like all the others. Zexthor saw Mira standing at the presentation platform and his mandibles curved into a smile. Still trying to blame others for your own failures? He said loud enough for everyone to hear. Silence, Counselor Quarter commanded. You 3 are accused of harassment, sabotage, fraud, and property destruction. The evidence against you is substantial. How do you respond? Zexthor's confidence didn't waver. This is ridiculous. The human is lying. She has no proof. Actually, Mira said quietly, I have already presented proof of 47 separate incidents. Would you like me to replay the recordings? Perhaps the one where you explicitly discuss plans to destroy my final project. Zexthor's mandibles froze. You recorded us? The academy corridors have security cameras. I simply requested the footage. Which, as a student who has been threatened, I have every right to do. Mira pulled up another file. This is from week 13. Your conversation with Vral and Kess in corridor 7B. The hologram showed the 3 Krolvians walking together. Their voices came through clearly. The final project is next week, Vral was saying. If we destroy it, she fails the entire semester. Too risky, Kess replied. Security will investigate. Zexthor's voice cut through. Not if we make it look like equipment failure. I can access her presentation system during setup. Nobody will question a technical malfunction. The recording continued with them planning every detail. Where they would strike. How they would avoid detection. What lies they would tell if questioned. The council chamber was absolutely silent when the recording ended. Vral was the first to break. We were just talking. We didn't actually do anything. Mira pulled up another file. These are the remains of my storage drives, destroyed on the morning of my presentation. Forensic analysis shows the damage is consistent with deliberate crushing, not equipment failure. Security footage shows Zexthor entering the presentation room during the 3 minutes I was absent. And these fingerprint scans from the fragments match his claws. She had them. Completely. Undeniably. But Mira wasn't finished. However, there is more the council should know. She pulled out a new set of files. While documenting my own case, I discovered evidence of a larger pattern. The Krolvians were not just targeting me. They were part of an organized cheating operation. She displayed assignment files side by side. This is Zexthor's submitted work for advanced chemistry. This is the original work submitted by a student named Petra who graduated last year. The files are identical. Zexthor simply copied old assignments and submitted them as his own. More files appeared. Vral did the same in quantum physics. Kess in stellar navigation. But it goes further. They were selling these stolen assignments to other students. The hologram filled with transaction records. 12 students from 4 different species had purchased assignments from the Krolvians. The evidence was overwhelming. Communication logs. Payment transfers. Before and after comparisons of submitted work. They built an entire fraud network, Mira said. They targeted me because I refused to participate. When I wouldn't buy answers, I became a problem to eliminate. The Krolvian counselor looked like she might be sick. The other council members stared at the evidence in horror. Counselor Quarter's voice was heavy. In 300 years of academy operation, I have never seen anything like this. The scope of the violations. The calculated nature of the crimes. The complete lack of remorse. He looked at Mira with something approaching awe. Miss Chin, you have presented a legal case that would put professional investigators to shame. How did a first-year student accomplish this? Mira closed her briefcase. My family are lawyers and investigators. I grew up learning how to build cases, how to gather evidence, how to be patient and thorough. These skills are common among humans. We learned long ago that the one who documents everything usually wins. She looked at the 3 Krolvians. They stood with their shells dulled, their confidence shattered. They finally understood what they had been dealing with. Not a weak victim. A patient predator who had been gathering evidence for a kill shot. The council will deliberate, Counselor Quarter said. But I can tell you now, Miss Chen, that expulsion is the minimum consequence these students will face. Academic fraud of this magnitude may result in criminal charges. Mira nodded. Thank you, Counselor. That is all I wanted. Justice. She picked up her briefcase and walked toward the exit. As she passed the Krolvians, Zexthor whispered, You planned this from the beginning. Mira stopped and looked back at him. Yes. From the very first day you mocked me. I knew you wouldn't stop. So I decided to end it permanently. You mistook silence for weakness. That was your fatal error. She walked out of the chamber into the bright corridor beyond, leaving 3 shattered bullies and 7 stunned council members behind her. The council had suspended Zexthor, Vral, and Kess pending their final decision. The 3 Krolvians were confined to their quarters while investigators dug deeper into their cheating network. But suspension was not expulsion. They still had access to the common corridors during mealtimes. They still walked the same halls as Mira. That was their first mistake. 2 days after the hearing, Mira walked through Corridor 7B on her way to the library. It was early evening, a quiet time when most students were eating dinner in the main cafeteria. The corridor was empty except for the soft hum of the station's life support systems. She heard them before she saw them. Heavy footsteps. 3 sets. Moving fast. Mira didn't run. She didn't call for help. She simply stopped walking and turned around. Zexthor, Vral, and Kess were approaching from behind. Their shells were dark with rage. Their mandibles clicked in aggressive patterns. They had nothing left to lose. Their academic careers were over. Their families would be disgraced. And it was all because of one small human who wouldn't stay quiet. You destroyed us, Zexthor snarled. His forearms flexed, claws extending. You took everything from us. Mira set down her backpack carefully against the wall. You destroyed yourselves. I just documented it. We're going to make you pay, Vral hissed. We're already expelled. What's one more charge? Assaulting a human seems worth it. Kess moved to flank her from the left. Nobody's around. No witnesses. Just you and us. Mira looked at each of them calmly. You're wrong about the witnesses. But go ahead. If this is what you choose to do, I won't stop you from making another mistake. Zexthor lunged first. He was big and strong, with the natural advantages of a species that evolved on a high-gravity world. His claws reached for Mira's shoulders, intending to slam her against the wall. Mira moved. She didn't move away. She moved into the attack, stepping inside Zexthor's reach where his size became a disadvantage. Her hand struck upward, fingers extended, hitting the soft joint where his primary arm connected to his shoulder. The nerve cluster there sent pain shooting through his entire right side. Zexthor stumbled, surprised. Humans weren't supposed to know Krolvian anatomy. They weren't supposed to fight back. Vral came from the right, trying to grab her from behind. Mira dropped low, using Vral's own momentum against him. She swept his legs with a precise kick to the back of his knee joint. He crashed to the floor, his shell clanging against the metal deck. Kess hesitated. This wasn't going the way they had planned. The small human was supposed to be helpless. She was supposed to be afraid. Instead, Mira stood in a relaxed stance, breathing normally, watching all 3 of them with those cold, patient eyes. Last chance to walk away, she said quietly. Zexthor roared and charged again, this time with all four arms reaching for her. Mira waited until the last possible second, then sidestepped and grabbed one of his arms. She used his own momentum to send him crashing into the wall. The impact dented the metal panels. Vral got back up and rushed her together with Kes. 2 against 1. They thought numbers would make the difference. Mira had studied human martial arts since she was 6 years old. Her grandmother had been a teacher, part of a tradition that went back hundreds of years on Earth. We are small, her grandmother had said. So we must be smart. We must use physics and anatomy and patience. She ducked under Kes's swing and struck his thorax joint, the weakness in Krolvian armor that protected their breathing spiracles. He gasped and staggered back. Vral tried to grab her from behind again, and she drove her elbow into the soft spot under his mandibles. He released her with a screech of pain. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. When it was over, all 3 Krolvians were on the ground, gasping and groaning. Mira stood over them, barely winded. She had a small cut on her cheek where Zexthor's claw had grazed her, but otherwise she was unhurt. Stay down, she said. Security is already on the way. Zexthor looked up at her with hatred and confusion. How did you? You're just a human. Mira touched her cheek and looked at the small amount of blood on her fingers. Humans evolved on a planet full of predators bigger and stronger than us. We survived by being smarter. By learning to fight things we couldn't overpower. Every species has advantages. You just never bothered to learn what ours were. Station security arrived 3 minutes later, weapons drawn. They stopped in shock at the scene. 3 large Krolvians on the ground. 1 small human standing calmly beside them. Miss Chin, the security chief said, a tall Vexlar named Thex. What happened here? They attacked me, Mira replied. I defended myself. It's all on camera. Thex looked confused. Camera? This corridor doesn't have security coverage. It's one of the older sections. Mira reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. Academy regulations allow students to install personal security cameras in their assigned living areas. I installed several weeks ago. This corridor is the route I take to the library every day. I thought it would be wise to have coverage. She handed the device to Thex. Everything is recorded. The verbal threats. The physical assault. My defensive response. Time-stamped and verified. Thex played back the footage on his datapad. His compound eyes widened as he watched. You planned for this. I planned for many possibilities, Mira said. This was one of them. Statistically, expelled students sometimes seek revenge. I simply prepared for that probability. As security took the 3 Krolvians into custody, word of the incident spread through the academy like wildfire. Students heard that the quiet human had fought off 3 Krolvians. That she had predicted their attack. That she had cameras ready. That she had turned even their revenge into evidence against them. The story grew with each retelling. Some details were exaggerated. Some were accurate. But the core truth remained. Mira Chin was not what she appeared to be. In the dormitories, students began researching human history on Earth. What they found fascinated and frightened them. A Sussex student discovered information about chess, a human game where players thought dozens of moves ahead. Another found military records showing humans had waged wars lasting years, even decades, with careful planning and patience. A Mercii student found documentation of human legal systems, complex structures built on evidence and procedure. A Tarvian discovered Earth's history of espionage, where humans gathered information for years before acting. The pattern became clear. Humans didn't react. They planned. They waited. They gathered information. And when they finally moved, it was with overwhelming force and precision. In his xenobiology class the next day, Professor Teichrain addressed the topic directly. His 6 eyes swept across the lecture hall, noting the nervous energy in the room. Everyone had heard about the corridor fight. Many of you have questions about human capabilities, he began. Let me explain something about their evolution. Humans are pursuit predators. Do you know what that means? Students shifted in their seats. A few shook their heads. It means they hunt by chasing prey over long distances. Not for minutes. For hours. Sometimes for days. A human hunter would wound an animal and then follow it, walking steadily, never stopping, until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. They call it persistence hunting. Teichrain pulled up holographic images of early humans on Earth. They were not fast. They were not strong. But they never gave up. They could track a single animal across hundreds of kilometers. They could remember the trail for days. and they would not stop until they achieved their goal. He paused, letting the information sink in. This behavior translated into their psychology. Humans can suppress their immediate emotional reactions in favor of long-term strategic goals. They can endure suffering now for victory later. They can plan for months or years before acting. A student raised a tentacle. Professor, doesn't that make them dangerous? All intelligent species are dangerous, Rain replied. But humans are dangerous in a specific way. They are patient. They remember everything. And they do not forgive easily. Most species react immediately to threats or insults. Humans wait. They document. They prepare. And when they strike, it is with total precision. He looked around the room. Miss Chin demonstrated these traits perfectly. She endured harassment for 14 weeks. Not because she was weak. Because she was building a case. She documented 47 incidents. She gathered evidence. And when she finally acted, her enemies had no defense. The lecture hall was absolutely silent. The corridor fight yesterday was the same pattern. She predicted the attack. She prepared cameras. She studied Krolvian anatomy to know where to strike. She turned their revenge into additional charges against them. Every move they made fell into traps she had laid weeks in advance. Rain's scales shifted to a deep blue, signifying respect. This is what makes humans unique. They can sacrifice the present for the future. They can endure pain now to guarantee victory later. Very few species have this capability. A Krolvian student in the back spoke up nervously. Are you saying we should fear humans? No, Rain said. I'm saying you should respect them. Understand them. Never mistake their patience for weakness. Never assume their silence means acceptance. Humans are watching. Always learning. Always planning. He looked directly at the Krolvian student. And if you make an enemy of a human, you should know that they will never forget. They will wait for the perfect moment. And when that moment comes, you will have no chance to defend yourself because they will have already won. The lesson ended in thoughtful silence. Students filed out slowly, processing what they had learned. In the back row, a human student named Petra smiled slightly. She had watched Mira's case with professional interest. She made a mental note to introduce herself. It would be good to have another human at the academy who understood how the game was really played. The word spread beyond the academy walls. On communication channels across the galaxy, students told the story of the quiet human who turned 14 weeks of suffering into total victory. And everywhere the story went, aliens learned a new respect for the species they had dismissed as weak. Humans were patient. Humans were thorough. And humans never, ever forgot. The final verdict came 3 days after the corridor attack. The disciplinary council convened in their formal chamber, all 7 members present in their ceremonial robes. The decision was unanimous and absolute. Zexthor, Vral, and Kess were expelled from the Galactic Academy effective immediately. Their academic records were marked with permanent notations of fraud, harassment, and assault. Every institution in the galaxy would see those marks. No other academy would accept them. Their dreams of prestigious careers were finished. But the consequences went far beyond the 3 individuals. The council contacted the Krolvian home world. The families of the expelled students faced immediate diplomatic repercussions. Their trade agreements were reviewed. Their business licenses were questioned. In Krolvian culture, family honor was everything. The shame of having children expelled for such crimes was devastating. Zexthor's father, a prominent merchant, lost 3 major contracts within a week. Vral's mother, a government official, was forced to resign from her position. Kess's family business was boycotted by partners who didn't want to be associated with scandal. The message was clear. The Galactic Academy did not tolerate fraud or violence. And the consequences would reach far beyond the guilty individuals. Mira learned about the verdicts while sitting in Professor Rain's office. The elderly Sessic had called her in for what he described as a conversation. You have changed the academy, Rain said, settling into his chair. His 6 eyes studied her with curiosity and something that might have been concern. Students are afraid of humans now. Not afraid, Mira replied. Respectful. There's a difference. Is there? Rain clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. They whisper about you in the corridors. They say you're dangerous. That you plan everything. That you never forget. All of that is true. Doesn't it bother you? Being seen as a threat instead of a colleague. Mira considered the question carefully. Professor, before this semester humans were seen as weak, primitive, easy targets. Other students mocked us, dismissed us, treated us like charity cases who didn't belong here. Now they see us as competent, intelligent, strategic. I prefer the new perception. Rain's scale shifted to a pale green, indicating understanding. You wanted to change how your entire species was viewed. I wanted to make sure no other human student would be treated the way I was treated. Mission accomplished. At significant personal cost. You endured 14 weeks of harassment. You sacrificed your social relationships. You spent countless hours documenting evidence when you could have been making friends or enjoying your studies. Mira smiled slightly. My grandmother always said that anything worth doing requires sacrifice. She taught me that patience is the most powerful weapon. That documentation is stronger than anger. That one perfect strike is better than 100 wild swings. Your grandmother is a lawyer? My grandmother, my mother, my father, and 3 of my uncles. My family has been in law and investigation for 4 generations. I grew up learning how to build cases, how to gather evidence, how to wait for the perfect moment to act. Rain leaned forward. You were trained for this. The Krolvians never stood a chance. They had every chance. They could have left me alone. They could have treated me with basic respect. They chose to make me an enemy. That was their decision, not mine. And now their lives are ruined. Their lives are ruined because they committed fraud and assault. I simply made sure there were consequences for their actions. Justice, Professor. Not revenge. Rain studied her for a long moment. I have been teaching for over 300 years. I have met thousands of students from hundreds of species. You are one of the most dangerous individuals I have ever encountered. Mira didn't flinch from his gaze. Because I document everything? Because you think in timescales others don't consider? Most students think about today, maybe tomorrow. You were planning weeks and months ahead. Every action you took was part of a larger strategy. That level of calculation in one so young is unsettling. Is it calculation or just common sense? If someone is hurting you, gather evidence. If someone is breaking rules, document it. If someone is threatening you, prepare defenses. These aren't complicated strategies. They're basic survival skills. Perhaps for humans. But most species don't think that way. They react emotionally. Immediately. Humans suppress those reactions. You turn emotions into fuel for long-term planning. That makes you fundamentally different. Mira stood to leave. Different doesn't mean wrong, Professor. It just means we approach problems in our own way. The galaxy is learning that now. The months that followed proved Rain correct. Humans did gain a new reputation at the academy. Word spread through every dormitory, every lecture hall, every student gathering. The species that had been dismissed as weak were now watched with careful respect. Human students noticed the change immediately. Other students no longer mocked them. Nobody sabotaged their projects. When humans spoke in class, others listened. When humans made suggestions, people considered them seriously. Some species found this change unsettling. The quiet humans who took notes and asked careful questions were now seen as potential threats. What were they documenting? What were they planning? Could you really trust someone who thought so far ahead? Other species found it fascinating. Study groups formed specifically to understand human strategic thinking. Students requested human roommates to learn their methods. Some even asked human students to teach them chess, that ancient Earth game of long-term planning. Petra, the human student who had watched Mira's case with interest, became close friends with her. They studied together, shared strategies, and quietly documented everything happening around them. Just in case. We're changing the culture here, Petra said one evening while they reviewed notes in the library. Every human who comes after us will benefit from what you did. That was the goal, Mira replied. I didn't suffer through 14 weeks of harassment just for myself. I did it so the next human student wouldn't have to. Do you think it worked? Mira smiled. Watch and see. The answer came 4 months later at the start of the new semester. Fresh students arrived at the academy, nervous and excited about their first year. Among them was a young Krolvian named Vexenar. He was arrogant and loud, convinced of his species' superiority. On his 3rd day, he noticed a quiet human student sitting alone in the cafeteria. The human was reading a textbook and eating a simple meal. He looked small, weak, easy to intimidate. Vexenar walked over with 2 of his new friends. Hey human, you're in my favorite seat. Move. The human looked up calmly. There are many empty seats. You can sit anywhere else. I said move. Or are you too stupid to understand simple commands? The cafeteria went silent. Every student nearby stopped eating and turned to watch. This was the moment. Would humans be bullied again? Had Mira's victory been temporary? Mira was sitting 3 tables away. She had been eating lunch and reviewing her notes for an upcoming exam. When she heard Vexenair's voice, she looked up. She didn't stand. She didn't rush over. She simply reached into her backpack and pulled out her notebook. The same worn notebook she had been carrying for months. She opened it to a fresh page and pulled out her pen. The movement was small, quiet. But every student in the cafeteria saw it. Vexenair saw it too. He looked at Mira. He looked at the notebook. His mandibles went very still. One of his friends whispered urgently in his ear. That's her. That's Mira Chin. The one who destroyed Zexthor and his family. She documents everything. Don't make her your enemy. Vexenair's shell paled from dark green to sickly yellow. He had heard the stories. Every Krolvian arriving at the academy heard them. The tale of 3 students who thought they could bully a human. Who thought patience meant weakness. Who learned too late that humans never forgot and always struck with perfect timing. He looked back at the human student sitting calmly at the table. The student who had done nothing wrong except exist peacefully in a public space. I apologize, Vexenair said quietly. I was rude. Please enjoy your meal. He turned and walked away quickly, his friends following. The cafeteria remained silent for a moment. Then conversation resumed, but with a new understanding rippling through the room. Mira closed her notebook without writing anything. She smiled slightly and returned to her lunch. The human student who had been threatened came over to Mira's table. His name was Peter, and he was new to the academy. Thank you, he said. I don't think I could have handled that alone. You didn't have to handle it alone, Mira replied. That's the point. Every human here has each other's backs. We document. We prepare. We make sure there are consequences for those who cross the line. Will you teach me how to do what you do? Mira considered him for a moment. Then she pulled out her notebook and turned to a fresh page. First lesson. Always carry a notebook. Second lesson. Document everything. Third lesson. Patience is power. Peter pulled out his own notebook and started writing. Around the academy, human students began forming networks. They shared documentation techniques. They taught each other observation skills. They studied legal procedures and evidence gathering. They became a quiet, watchful presence that other species learned to respect. Professor Teichrain watched this transformation with mixed feelings. On one hand, he was pleased to see human students finally receiving the respect they deserved. On the other hand, he wondered what it meant for the Academy's future when an entire species was training itself in strategic patience and perfect documentation. In his next xenobiology lecture, he added a new section to the curriculum. It was titled Human Strategic Thinking, a case study in long-term planning. He taught it every semester from then on, using Mira's case as the primary example. Humans are unique, he would tell each new class. They evolved as persistence hunters. They learned to sacrifice immediate gratification for future success. They learned to document, to plan, to wait for the perfect moment. When you encounter a human, remember this. Their silence is not weakness. Their patience is not fear. They are watching. They are learning. And if you make them your enemy, they will defeat you with a precision you cannot imagine. Students listened. They learned. And they spread the word. The reputation grew beyond the academy. On trade stations and diplomatic outposts across the galaxy, aliens began to see humans differently. Not as the newest species. Not as the primitive ones. But as the quiet ones who thought ahead. The patient ones who never forgot. Years later, Mira graduated with top honors. She returned to Earth briefly, then accepted a position at the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Her job was to investigate fraud and corruption across multiple systems. She was very good at it. She still carried her notebook. She still documented everything. She still believed that patience was the most powerful weapon. And across the galaxy, beings of every species learned a simple truth. If you treated humans with respect, they were loyal and helpful allies. But if you made them your enemy, you would regret it for the rest of your life. Because humans never forgot. Humans always planned ahead. And when humans struck, they struck with perfect, calculated precision. Mirachin had taught the galaxy that lesson. And it was a lesson they would never forget.